Yeah, thank you for agreeing to speak with us. We're a really small independent magazine here in Austin, and it's really a big favor to us that you agreed to this.
Oh, I'm honored to. Thanks for taking the time. Um, yeah, I'm excited to chat.
Can you tell me, Jonathan, how you got started in journalism?
Sure. I got started in journalism. I majored in English in college, and I started doing some internships. Interned at a tiny music magazine in college, and I interned at Rolling Stone. And I started freelance writing just for really small publications right when I graduated college. But my big break, I would say, came when I knew I had a friend of a friend who um, was part-time fact-checking at Rolling Stone and was leaving the job, and he told me about it. And I had already interned there, and I basically begged my way to get in to start working there part-time as an hourly wage fact-checker. And I'm still fact-checking at Rolling Stone 13 years later. So that's kind of that's the short version.
Wow, and were you a musician before you got into music journalism, or were you just looking for any type of journalism to work in?
I was not a musician. No, I mean, I played clarinet in middle school, but I loved music from, starting, I guess, really in high school. I started just taking it really seriously, got into it through my dad, but just listening and reading about it. So I loved reading, I loved writing, I loved music, and I loved reading and writing about music. So it kind of just combined everything.
And is this your first full-length book?
Yes, very much. This is my first book.
Wow, man, congratulations.
Thank you, dude.
I know that's got to be just a mountain of work. I read that you had, I think, 200 interviews.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy amount of work, and it was pretty challenging to do while I had a full-time job during it. So I'm looking forward to sleeping some more than I have the last few years.
I can imagine, yeah. Can you tell me when you got the idea to write this book about Justin Townes Earl, how did that come about and how did you get connected with his family?
Yeah, so I mean, I had been a fan of Justin's starting in college, so I always loved his music. But I guess the idea for this book really kind of started after I wrote a story after Justin died, where I started to interview, his bandmates, his family members, people who knew him really well, for like a longer Rolling Stone article in the fall of 2020. And I just started, getting more of a sense of his life, and frankly, getting much more of a sense of how little I really knew. I thought that I kind of understood his life because I was a big fan, right? And he was very forthcoming about his life in interviews. So like you kind of thought you knew him sort of as a fan. I think that was a lot of artists, a lot of fans' connection to him is there was that real intense kind of intimacy you felt you had with him because he kind of just wore his heart on his sleeve, both in his a lot of his songs and just in interviews and on stage. And I once I wrote that Rolling Stone article, I realized just how not true that was, just how much more there was to him than I had ever could have imagined. How much crazier his life was, frankly, than I realized. How much kind of more heartbreaking it was than I realized. How much more beautiful it was than I realized. And in starting to have those conversations with his loved ones, I kind of knew that there were just so many people who had never sort of told their story about Justin, who had never like been interviewed about him, and who had so much to say about him. So that article came out in like January of 2021, and I basically spent the next year kind of brewing on the concept of like, wow, is there? I think I'm not done. I don't feel like I'm done with this topic. I feel like there's so much more to say.
Right. And the first time that I read about Justin was probably in 2011 or so, a feature they did in the magazine Garden and Gun.
Oh yeah, that's a great piece.
And at that point in time, he was living in New York City, and I know you're located there. Were you ever friends with him while he was in New York City at that time, or?
No, I never met Justin in person. I interviewed him once over the phone a couple years after that in like 2014. But I did get to see Justin play several times, a number of times in New York City. I guess most, but not all of the shows that I saw him play were there. I saw him play everywhere from the Beacon Theater to Webster Hall to Town Hall to City Winery. But no, I never. I moved to New York in the fall of 2011, and that was right around the time he was starting to slowly transition to living back in Nashville. So like I'd like to think maybe if I lived in the city a couple years earlier and had been hip to where he was hanging out, we would have crossed paths, but we kind of just missed each other.
Wow, man, yeah, I just missed him. Um,
Yeah,
I know that he was, inspired for Harlem River Blues from the Basketball Diaries, and he had other songs about New York City. In particular, I absolutely loved working for the MTA.
yeah, me too.
I'm a songwriter, and at that time, it really showed me that you could take a Carter family song and write a new version of something like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And these kind of songs and that album really showed some of us down here in Texas a little bit about New York culture. Do you feel like it kind of had a good picture of that?
Yeah, and what I kind of love about that album is that it's an album about New York, but it's also an album that some sort of someone who, in a way, isn't from New York and is newly in New York only could have written because it's so much, it's like people who live here, like, there are a lot of folk singers in New York. Everyone, I don't know if anyone thinks to write a folk song about the six train because it's almost too obvious. Do you know what I mean? But I think it was what was so kind of fresh and exciting about that record is like, here's this person who's born and raised Southerner, born and raised Nashvilleian, who just comes to the city with new eyes and is so excited about it and kind of reflects almost his new relationship to the city, but it was also kind of reflecting his musical relationship to the South and to the Southeast. Like it's his record. I feel like what's partially what's interesting about Harlem River Blues is it's almost his most Southern rootsy record in a way musically, while lyrically, of course, being you know the most topical, nothing to do with Nashville kind of record in his catalog. So I think it's a really kind of, yeah, like I said, almost really exciting, kind of vibrant, lively portrait of a place that, yeah, almost only could have been written from an outsider's perspective.
Absolutely. And, back in that Garden and Gun magazine, he was talking a lot about hanging out in bars in New York City. Um, I guess he was struggling with alcohol hard at that time, and maybe he had become sober after that article had come out. Was there a period of time after Harlem River Blues where he had become sober?
Yeah, Justin really kind of relapses right after Harlem River Blues I mean, he'd been relapsing kind of slowly and gradually while recording and writing that album and kind of while living in New York, but it becomes very public, sort of comes to a head right after the album comes out and he goes to rehab and he, gets arrested. And it's a very kind of heartbreaking moment in his career that really kind of shaped and changed the way that he was. It changed and shaped his public image in a lot of ways because when he started making records, his story was that he was a sober man who had kind of had a crazy past, but had kind of grown past it and had learned from it. And that was really key to his identity as an artist. It was really key to his image and the story that he told the world about himself and who he was. And his relapse in 2010 really kind of changed, it in some ways it didn't invalidate that narrative, but it added a new kind of thorny chapter to it. And Justin, he did indeed. I mean, when Justin got out of rehab in the fall of 2010, right after Harlem River Blues, he um, isn't completely sober for a while. At least, at least abstaining from alcohol. He starts smoking weed again pretty soon thereafter. And Justin, he did have large periods where he was largely refraining from any substances other than weed for many years after Harlem River Blues. But I would say that um, my sense is that uh, unlike the few years that preceded his relapse in 2010, so from 2004 to about 2008, Justin is stone cold sober, like no weed, you know, biggest vices are ice cream and cigarettes and coffee, right? Um, and I don't think that he was ever quite able to get back to that level of like 100% pure sobriety after Harlem River Blues. But he did approach kind of his a different version of that, which kind of did involve a lot of prescribed medication that he was taking for mental health issues, and did involve a whole lot of marijuana. So that would be kind of my yeah, clinical substance answer there, if that makes sense.
Right. And so was it I guess, from Yuma till midnight in the movies he was recording totally sober?
Yeah, that would be right. That would be it. Yeah, Yuma was written and recorded completely sober. And his first two albums, he might have started smoking just a tiny bit of weed by the time he's in the studio for Midnight at the Movies. But he goes into the studio for that record in October 2008, and that's right around where he just starts toying with weed again for the first time in 4 years. But those three records were all written while he was. I mean, some of the songs are really old and dating back to his like pre-sobriety days for sure. But those albums all came to be exactly during Justin's period of complete sobriety, and I think that's a really important. I'm glad you asked that. I think it's a really important point to keep in mind because those were the albums that really put Justin on the map and that established him as an artist and that showed the beauty and the promise of his songwriting. And I think it's really important to remember the really good um, place that he was in, the really healthy place that he was in mentally and physically when he made all those records.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredibly inspiring to me. I struggled with alcoholism a lot in my life, and
Yeah.
I got sober after learning about Justin. And
Wow.
I think a lot of people don't. I think it will be, unfortunately, a longer period of time before people widely recognize how important Yuma and um, the country album "Good Time." What was it called?
Yeah. Good life.
Good Life. I think a lot of the wider audience of music fans are unaware of how groundbreaking those records are in those genres.
I think that's right, and I think this is I didn't interview Josh Headley, who was he's just a great country singer, but one of his first gigs was playing fiddle for Justin on the road for years. I didn't get a chance to interview Josh for the book, but he did tweet sometime. He said in the sometime in the last few years that Justin's second album, Midnight the Movies, Josh Headley thinks is like one of the under-acknowledged influences on modern Americana music, and I think he's really onto something. And I think that extends to his first record, The Good Life, as well. To your point, I think that those are um, some of the most astonishing records in his catalog. And honestly, The Good Life was a record that I never appreciated as much before I started writing this book and learning about what went into those songs and that album. Really, I now think it's one of his greatest records.
I totally agree with you, and as a country music singer and a country music fan, I've never heard another country album that is that unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think that The Good Life is one of those records where you hear it today and there's so many records that sound like it and that I think in some ways are inspired by that kind of retro revivalist sound that Justin was tapping into that you don't realize how influential it is because it is so influential. But it was a very strange record for a indie label to be releasing in 2008. Those were not those honky tonk classic sounds. Like there weren't country bars all over there weren't old school country bars that had opened all over the country in 2008 like there are now. It was really, I mean, Austin is its own thing. Of course, that music has always lived and thrived in your town, but like for a hipster, for like the type of audience that Justin was reaching, which is like, let's just say a college radio indie label audience, because that was his label, Bloodshot. Like that was a very strange, very uncool type of sounding record to release in 2008, and it was really pretty punk that Justin made this like 50s country album at that time in music.
Yeah, I mean the opening song, when you hear the opening song from The Good Life, you're like, I have never heard a song like this before.
Exactly, and that was I saw Justin for the first time a year after that record, like right after Midnight the Movies, 2009, and I was 19, and it was that exact feeling. I was like, what? Who the hell is this 27-year-old that sounds like he's coming out of 1940s Hank Williams, fan fiction? Like I'd never heard anybody sing like that ever, and I'm sure Hard Living was one of the first songs he did when I saw him that night. So couldn't agree more.
Wow, yeah. I when I started songwriting in the early 2010s, I was hanging out with another musician, Vincent Emerson,
Oh
and
yeah.
we were at the open mic together and just getting rolling on becoming musicians. And he had introduced me to Justin, but at that time I had just randomly read that piece from Garden and Gun and wanted to hear him. And so at that time we just became obsessed with the Harlem River Blues album had just been released, and yeah, this, going back and listening to his catalog before that it's like a masterclass in how to be a songwriter. You have the solo record, the country record, the Americana record, and then you have the groundbreaking kind of gospely record.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then
that's
I got to see him for the first time. I guess Vincent and I traveled to go see him when he was doing a tour for uh, Nothing's Gonna Change.
hmm
And I guess he was sober in that period of time.
yeah. Yeah,
And
he was.
he was at the top of his musical ability as far as I'm concerned, and it was just we were like 5 feet from the stage in this club, just in awe. Our eyes opened.
That's amazing. I saw that tour too. That was a really exciting time in his career. It was really fun to see him play. That was the first time he ever toured with a drummer, like with a actual full electric band, and it was really different from the years of touring he had done largely solo or as an acoustic duo or even as an acoustic trio. And it was really cool to get that full sort of band leader side of him on that tour.
Yeah, and actually, just the other day, I was hanging out with Dustin Welch, who helped write one of my favorite songs
No
on that
way.
album. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I did my a book event in Nashville last weekend, and Dustin was kind enough to fly up from Austin to. He was like the main. We had some musicians come play, sing his songs, and Dustin closed the whole event with 4 songs, including Lower East Side, and he's such a sweet, sweet, sweet person.
Yeah, he's a really good dude. I'm I don't know. I hope he can find his path back to the stage and everything soon in a bigger way.
Definitely. Definitely, man. He's a really powerful performer. It was, we were in tears hearing him sing some of those Justin songs at
Wow.
Grammys last weekend. It was amazing. He's one of the people I feel most, you know, writing this book was a real blessing for me in that I got to meet and get to know, in some cases, Justin's community of, friends and loved ones and family members and past bandmates. And Dustin is someone who not only is so integral to Justin's story in a way that he had never, I don't really think he'd ever gotten his proper acknowledgement for. He really, the band that he let Justin into, the Swindlers, as a teenager, was like completely instrumental in forming Justin's artistic identity in a way that Justin never acknowledged. But more than that, he's just one of the most kind, warm, generous, and thoughtful people that I've gotten to meet during this process, and really, it's been really amazing to get to meet people like Dustin in telling Justin's story.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We're lucky to know him down here. And
Awesome.
another guy that was really instrumental to Justin's career was Paul Niehaus.
Yeah.
How did he get to know him, and did they have sort of a falling out towards the end of their career, or how did that happen?
How did Justin get to know Paul?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember. I think Paul first entered Justin's musical orbit. I believe he played pedal steel on 1 or 2 songs on Harlem River Blues, if I'm not mistaken. And he ended up from there on out played on every single one of Justin's records. I think Paul Niehaus was for the majority of Justin's solo career, like Justin's number one foremost musical, bandmate accompanier. Like Justin wouldn't do hardly anything without Paul. They did a lot of duo tours where it was just Paul and Justin. Um, I think the most telling example of it is when Justin he went to record an album in Omaha, Nebraska, Kids in the Street in 2016, 2017. And the idea was to let's work with a totally different producer and a totally different group of musicians. Let's leave Nashville. Let's shake things up and see what we get, kind of. And Justin reluctantly was on board with that, but he had his one qualification is I will not play or I will not make a record with these musicians I've never met without Paul. So Paul was the one person from Justin's musical orbit who flew down to Nebraska with him and played on that entire record. And to me, that shows kind of how much Justin both trusted and relied on Paul musically. And no, I don't think that they had any kind of falling out. In particular, I think Justin distanced himself from just about anybody in his life, both professionally and musically and personally, in the last year or two of his life. So I'm not saying Justin was easy to be around, and there might have been difficulties there, but Paul played on Justin's last full band tour, and in fact, he was the person that would stay up the latest with Justin, when Justin was kind of wiling out and really heavily using after shows and staying up all night basically. Paul would be the one who stayed up latest and kept Justin company before he had to, call it a night himself at whatever ungodly hour it would be. So they were incredibly close. And yeah, Justin, I think, I don't know that there's any musician living who was more integral to Justin's sound on stage and on record than Paul Niehaus, from 2010 to 2020.
Yeah, I guess the reason I had kind of asked that question is because at the end of his career, he was touring solo, and I didn't know if there was a reason Paul wasn't there.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I spoke with Justin's manager. The last couple months of shows Justin ever did were solo gigs, basically for financial reasons. Justin's finances were kind of a mess, and he needed to play some shows that would actually have as low overhead as possible, so that he could actually take some money home and help support his family at that point in his career. So he devised a very specific little kind of strategy with his manager at the time to play solo, to play acoustic, so he wouldn't have to pay anybody. But I have no doubt that if Justin had been able to live longer and keep going and make more records and keep touring with various outfits, that Paul would have been a part of that as long as Paul was up for it.
Yeah. There's another musician he was hanging with. There's a amazing version of Down in the Valley with Corey Jones on harmonica.
Yes.
Did they? What happened with those guys, and how did they get together?
Yeah. So the person, just as I was saying that, I'm not going to say that Corey was replaced by Paul, but in the same way that Paul was so integral to who Justin Townes Earle was musically in his 30s, in his 20s, that person was Corey Ounce. And, the first time I saw Justin play, it was them as a duo, him and Corey. And they were, I never saw a better version of Justin live than it was when it was just him and Corey. And they went way back to the teenage days of being in this band, the Swindlers. And so they had been through a lot together. They've been playing music together for about 10 years, and they did have a professional falling out, though it was ended up being resolved. And Corey plays on Justin's last ever record, Saint of Lost Causes, kind of reunites with him on it. But basically, Corey got a better job. Corey got a gig playing with Old Crow Medicine Show, which he is still in to this day.
Oh, I didn't
And
know that.
Justin wasn't too fond of that, and then basically announced that he had fired him. And they split ways in kind of a tense way in the fall of 2009, after playing together for many years. Like in the early days of Justin's career, Corey was the guy, logging thousands and thousands of miles in a pickup truck together, kind of thing.
Was Corey interviewed for the project?
Yeah, I interviewed Corey extensively for sure. Yeah, he's a
Uh,
really important part of. He's incredibly important part of the story.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, our libraries had your book checked out solid. I'm trying to get a copy of my own, but
Oh, that's all right.
I
That's all right.
wanted to read it before speaking with you, but I apologize.
And if you
Um,
wanna, if you want, I can try to see if my publisher can send you a copy if it helps you write your story, of course.
I want to support you, man. I'll go buy one myself.
Thanks, man. That's kind.
Um,
Just let me know if you need one. I can also send you a PDF too, like if you
okay.
need, instantly.
Right on, man. Right on. I think I'll just pick it up and this will be good.
Right
But
on. Well, I won't argue with that.
there was another, public falling out that I hate to ask about, but it is an important part of Justin's story, and that's with Jason Isbell.
Yeah, of course. And is it? I gotta run in about 4 minutes. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah, Jason and Justin were thick as thieves. They were incredibly close. Um, they were very like-minded, very similar in a lot of ways. They both had their histories with substance use, of course. They're both incredibly determined, stubborn, and resolute, talented songwriters. And from about 2007 to 2013, really, they are incredibly close friends. It's not just people who tour with each other. Like people are going to hang out with their girlfriends on, when they're home in Nashville. And I think a lot of things contributed to their falling out, but the main sort of inciting factor, which Jason has talked about in public before, so this isn't really kind of too revelatory in some ways, but Justin had a pretty bad breakup with a long-term girlfriend in 2013, and Jason pretty quickly thereafter hired her to be his tour manager. And I think as I don't know why he did that, but she was a very good tour manager, and he probably, maybe he was making a statement as to say like, I'm not gonna get involved in my friend's personal drama or whatever. And Justin viewed it as like a supreme betrayal. Basically, he felt very betrayed by his friend, and he was going through a really hard time mentally and sort of emotionally during that period in his life. And he basically never, he was lashing out, and it was a period of time where he was distancing himself from a lot of people, and he basically never forgave Justin, or he never forgave Jason for, um, what he viewed as a betrayal like that. But
Hmm.
there was a lot of other things going on as well. I mean, both of them were Justin was more successful earlier on, then Jason became more successful. Justin was the sober one earlier on, then Jason became the sober one. So I think that they kind of started to clash, and a lot of the things that maybe brought them really close started to become really complicated in their friendship. And yeah, they never made up. It's pretty tragic, but that happened with a lot of Justin's relationships, whether they were platonic or personal or musical. He would get very close to someone for a period of time, and then usually find a way to isolate himself and get very and create a lot of distance between those people.
And I have two really brief last questions if you have the time.
Yeah, yeah.
When Justin passed away, was he trying to use cocaine that was tainted, or was he actually abusing fentanyl?
The former. He was using cocaine, and he had no idea there was that there was fentanyl in it. It's really really
Oh,
devastating.
that's so awful, man.
Yeah,
And I guess the last
yeah.
question is, do you think Justin's story now will help those getting sober, or do you think his story is just an American tragedy?
I think it's both. I think Justin's story is very much an American tragedy, and I also hope that I hope my goal in writing this book and telling it the way I did was to show people how much Justin invested in his own sobriety and his own trying to get better, and that he was ultimately not able to stay sober, but that he believed so much in it. His father believed so much in it, and you know, I hope that people, when they see the grim reality of Justin's inability to not remain sober, I hope those who are struggling themselves see, can look back at prior periods of Justin's determination and his strength, and take a lot of comfort in that, and try to make, of course, different decisions than Justin was able to make for himself, because hopefully they see, what it costs for him. So I hope that Justin was always an inspiration for lots of people who struggle with addiction, and I hope that that remains the case even more so when they find out the true strength of his story and the true tragedy of his story.
Right on, man. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much, man. I think the work that you've done here is a really important piece of American history, and I'm proud of you for putting that together.
Man, I so appreciate that. Thank you for saying that.
And thanks for taking the time, man. We'll publish this out fairly soon, maybe within a week or two.
Great. Let me know when it's out, and I'll be sure to take a look and spread the word. I really appreciate getting to speak with you.
Thanks, Jonathan. We'll talk to you later.
All right. See ya.
Bye.